Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Chris Kirk, Stone & Chalk's General Manager here in South Australia. And this afternoon, it's my absolute pleasure to be joined by Josephine Too for today's event, titled, Regardless of Market Volatility, Growth is Possible. First off, before we get started, just some quick housekeeping. We've had a really good number of questions come through for this event, and Josephine will attempt to answer them both through her presentation and at the end of the presentation. But we're also encouraging as many questions as possible. So please just jump into the chat and write down your questions as we go. There'll also be a series of about 7 or 8 polls that we'll run, and we encourage you to participate in those. And at the end of the event, there'll be a short survey as well. So please stick around and do that for us. We've had over 150 people register for today's event, and I know that some of you aren't residents of Stone & Chalk. So for those of you that are new to our virtual space, welcome. Stone & Chalk was founded in FinTech in 2015. We're actually a non-for-profit organisation, and our mission is to nurture, connect, and propel those who are seeking to solve the world's most pressing challenges. That's taken us outside of FinTech into a whole number of new and emerging industries. For example, in South Australia, we're now supporting companies working in space tech, in defence, in clean energy, and right across new and emerging industries like agriculture as well. Today's event could not be more timely. The topic of how to pivot and prepare your business and really think about forward strategic planning in the COVID age has, I'm sure, been very topical for many founders. And Josephine, we're incredibly lucky to have join us today. For those of you that don't know Josephine, she's a strategist with over 20 years experience in strategy consulting, executive management. She's scaled a NASDAQ listed tech company across Asia. She's a certified agile and business coach, and she was actually one of Stone & Chalk's first residents. So she's a seasoned entrepreneur. You know, the last time I saw Josephine, she was actually installing giant ATMs that had facial recognition technology. She's always been one step ahead of the curve, and we've been really lucky over the years to have her both help Stone & Chalk and a number of our residents with ways and frameworks to think about their strategy. Josephine, fantastic, and thank you for joining us today. And over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm going to start by sharing my screen quickly. And we're going to kick off today with a first poll. If Lucia, if you could just quickly set the poll up for us. Thank you for joining us today. I know all of you are probably having a Zoom fatigue and a webinar overload, so I appreciate your time. Grab your coffee, beverage, and probably your lunch. Get your pens ready and take some notes because I'm sure there'll be many insights that you might have. Okay, we are looking at the poll, and the polls are coming in. Just want to get a sense of what everybody thinks the next few years is going to look like. It looks like it's a pretty realistic bunch of people that we have here online today. Let's end the polling, Lucia. Let's start with the first slide. We are in unprecedented times. We are experiencing chaos on all levels and in every aspect of our lives, and that's why it makes it so unprecedented. First of all, we have it in health and wealth and in our social lives. Then we have it in business and economies, in trade and geopolitics, and then in community and in civil society. It is creating what we call the VUCA conditions and environment. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And as human beings, when we encounter such condition, it causes us to actually to contract and to be cautious so that we can feel safe. It's a natural response given the conditions. But however, it is exactly the opposite that we need to do as leaders to make decisions and to take proactive actions, which we will talk more about in today's presentation. Quickly, let's set the time frame. It is really important for us to establish some timelines because without it, it is really difficult to plan. Some of you might be familiar with Thomas Pugh. He's the one who coined the term flattening the curve in his Medium article called Hammer and the Dance. In phase 1, which is the hammer phase, which is the lockdown, hammer literally means flattening the curve. And that's what we have experienced recently in the last few months. And obviously for Victoria, you're going back to lockdown again. In phase 2 is where we emerge from lockdown into the dance phase, where probably most of the restriction will be eased, but there will be clusters of outbreak. So it is critical that in phase 2, that proper testing is in place, contact tracing, quarantine, large gatherings will still be banned, and international travel will still be restricted. And this period will probably go through for quite some time, and I call it the transition phase. And we are looking at probably a 1 to 2 years of phase 2 of a transitional phase. And phase 3 is what I call the post-dance phase, which is the new normal. So phase 3 really is what either a vaccine will be found, looking at potentially, again, vaccine is going to be take around 18 months the fastest. So the transitional phase is a realistic 1 to 2 years. So either a vaccine will be found or some control mechanism will be in place to make it safe to travel again. So that is the 3 phases that we'll be talking through today. Economic recovery curve. This is the best case scenario for an economic recovery at an aggregated level. I'm aware that there has been quite a few different shape of V-shape, L-shape, U-shape recovery for different sectors or countries that's surfacing. But no matter which curve, the key point is that the recovery curve will heavily depend on 2 things. One, the effective control of virus containment. Second is the effective policy intervention in each of the countries and their market. As for companies and individuals, we are also going through these 4 stages. Stage 1 and 2 is what we call resolve and resilience. We have quickly gone through taking steps to resolve working from home, the operational challenges where you have to move your workforce, stabilizing your customers and the supply partners, and addressing those immediate challenges. Resilience is about taking the cash flow and broader survivor issues, accessing grant, JobKeeper, renegotiating all your loan deferment and payments, renegotiating all renters, and establish some form of control and assurance in your cash flow. So that's probably what most companies and individuals has gone through. And we are getting ready for the return and reimagine phase as we move into phase 2. Phase 2. What will the new business climate look like in phase 2? In China, a few months after lockdown, there have been waves of companies actually declaring bankruptcy. And we are also seeing the waves of news that is coming up with regard to the big companies. Virgin that's getting into financial trouble, like Virgin, Hertz, the rental car company, retail companies, Tiger Lily. So all these are actually having impact also on the knock-on impact with companies that are suppliers to these companies. So we're going to have restricted money and credit. In this phase 2, all the goodwill of deferments, all the goodwill in terms of support will slowly be retracted. The loan deferments will all be retracted. So payments will be expected. You will be expected to pay. However, your customers will be getting delayed. You'll be having delay in the repayments that's coming in. There will be more selective lending and investment, and credit will be tightening. The next condition that we'll be facing is interrupted supply chain. We are seeing interrupted supply chain from the readjustment of what has happened to China. However, it has escalated into the trade tariffs, and geopolitical tension wars has also contributed to all these tariff wars. And then with the reduced frequency in travel and aviations, the reduce in volume is actually escalating logistic costs. Next is consumer spend. Consumer spending will be focused on essential spend. It is really important to realize that 70% of our GDP is actually driven by consumer spend. So if there's a sharp drop in consumer spending, that's going to be really a big issue. There will be reduce in wealth and a drop in discretionary spending. Again, in China, when they emerge out of recovery and they emerge out of lockdown, discretionary spend has actually dropped by 40%. And there will be more cautious as people are trying to increase their savings or try to save because of the uncertainty ahead. For companies and corporate spending, 20% of the GDP is actually driven by the corporate. And most of the corporate are actually supporting on the receiving end of the consumer spend. So if the consumer are not spending, it will have a trickle-down effect on the corporates. Corporates will, as you have here, is going through a resizing and probably a restructuring by streamlining their operations and reducing operational costs. We have been hearing companies announcing job cuts like News, Deloitte, moving into automation. Woolies has announced that they are cutting 900 jobs because of automation. Only then they will look at CAPEX spending, which is focusing on strategic spend that will actually move them into the new world. Lastly, the only big spending will be from government crisis spending, and government spending only contribute around 10% of the GDP. In general, they are just taking everybody's tax money and redistributing it. So government crisis spending will be focused on support spend, virus containment spending, and stimulus policy to stimulate the economy. It is important for you to understand what does it mean for your business to operate in this new business climate. Does your operation fit into this climate? Is the demand actually for your company in line with this spending? These are the questions that you actually have to think through. Next, it is important to know how to spot real growth market instead of what I call a fake growth, which is a lockdown fueled spike or an adjustment. I'm going to share 3 questions that you need to ask to help you triangulate real growth market. So the first question to ask is, what are the trends that was already growing and will be accelerated with the COVID lockdown experience and is reinforced by a few other trends? So just break it down briefly. I've listed here the 5 key trends that was already growing before COVID. And some of the subcategories and sub-trend of this key trend has been accelerated because of the COVID experience. And some of them are reinforced by a few other trends as well. So take digital retail. In the last 10 years, the retail market has moved to digital from 6 to 16% in the last 10 years in US. However, in the last 8 weeks, it has moved from 16 to 26%. That's how fast it has actually accelerated this trend. With convenience consumption, it's a bit like there's no going back, right? I mean, we are so lazy now in lockdown, we don't even go out and shop for groceries. We can just order online, same day delivery, we get instant satisfaction. We are so lazy that when you want to drink alcohol, we just call Jimmy and we can get it delivered by Jimmy. So this convenience on consumption trend is probably has reached a tipping point that it has changed the expectation of the consumer. As for the future of work, and these are the 2 more mature trends, future of work and digital retail. In the US, 1 out of 50 full-time employees work from home before COVID. And during the COVID experience, more than 1 in 3 now work from home in a full-time capacity. Again, that's how much it has actually accelerated this trend. And leading the pack, some of the tech companies are already questioning if employees actually need to return to our office. The digital enterprise, extended digital enterprise subcategory or sub-trend is something that will stay and probably grow and expand. Education and training and the reshoring global supply chain trend, it's a more emerging trend that probably has been kickstart, during the COVID experience, and it will kickstart the structural change that will start. That was the structural change that is needed in the formal education sector. We are seeing how the universities are actually changing their curriculum and the fees to reflect the new priorities in learning. And as we see more job losses, the reskilling of the workforce will need more training and re-education. I think in yesterday AFR, there was a company, there was an article called the EdTech Booming of this company called Adventure. They are saying that they are onboarding 1 global university every day. And they have probably seen a spike and a surge in demand in the last 2 weeks alone. Regional supply chain. In history, when there is a recession, most countries actually get more nationalistic. And with the escalating geopolitical tensions and trade tensions, and with government support, we are probably seeing how countries and companies are looking at the reshoring trend to bring manufacturing capacity into the region. To support that trend, it is not possible to move manufacturing capacity from a low-cost economy to a mature economy unless you can address the cost and quality equation. So robotics and automation is actually a key ingredient and key factor for that trend to take off. I think I saw there was a butcher called Tyson Butcher in the US, which has already started to use robotics in its meat factory. And Woolies recently has announced they're using automation to actually increase their efficiency and productivity. So again, the key question to ask is, what are the trends that was already growing and accelerated because of the COVID experience and is reinforced by a few key trends? The second question to ask and to know what a real market is, are you seeing secondary product and services rising to support the first wave of growth? Because a real growth market actually expands and deepens and actually eventually builds a new market ecosystem. So if you look at the few more mature trends of digital retail and future of work, you see that examples really clearly. So for example, in convenience consumption under digital retail, the first wave of that trend is what you call last mile logistics. Because if you're gonna have instant delivery, same-day delivery and convenience, you actually increase what you call the last mile logistic of the small parcel delivery. And the first wave is supported by mobile and social buy, the increase of that, and digital payments to support it. The second wave for that trend is you are beginning to see real estate developer designing smart lockers in the real estate development itself for apartments. Because they're expecting that a resident is going to have 24/7 deliveries from all this convenience consumption. So that design into that space is assuring and supporting the first wave of growth. And when you have increased digital consumption of services or purchase of product and services, you will need the digital identity verification in terms of security. And as you have the first wave of more digital consumption, you will then result in more data-driven personalized experience, as well as flexible and more cheaper payments like Afterpay and Air Wallets. As for extended digital enterprise, the first wave, what you have seen is a rise in co-working space, like Stone and Chalk, for example, and of course the saga of WeWork, as well as business application on cloud to support the extended digital enterprise wave. Second wave will then, what you will see in the second wave is secure remote work. Because as you see more and more people working from home, how do you work from home securely is going to be important. I think we just saw that Australia is the top 6 country, part of the top 6 country that is the most hacked, right? So security is going to be more and more important as a problem to solve. And because more web application, more business application is going to be on the cloud, cloud security will be this part of the second wave of growth area. The third question to ask to triangulate growth is look at where the money is going. In April, while we are still in lockdown, I did a quick search on all the startup that was funded in TechCrunch. And what you can see is all the startup actually fall under these 5 key trends. And interestingly, you can see that for digital retail and future of work trend, the startups that are funded are actually in these second waves, secondary product services that build atop of the first wave. For example, you see Grain as a startup that is built on top of Zoom, has raised 4 million, right? So most of them are falling under these 5 key trends. The last 2 key trends, obviously, it is a less mature trend, and you are seeing investment going into the entire sector. EdTech alone, you are seeing an increase in 14 times of investment in the next decade. Robotics itself, in February alone, you are seeing around 1.2 billion in February alone that has been invested into industrial and field robot to support the reshoring trend. So in summary, I've just quickly gone through the 3 phases, the current state we are in, and walked through how to spot real growth market and how COVID has shifted trends. Next, we want to talk about what are the 4 types of demand experiences that we have in lockdown. So quickly, for the second poll, Lucia, if you can launch the second poll for everybody, please. What is your demand and revenue experience look like in lockdown? Did you have a balloon in your revenue, which is more than 50% in growth? Did you have a surge in your revenue and demand, which is up to 30%? Did you have a contraction in your demand, which is around 30%? Or do you have a collapse in your demand, which is more than 50%? If all of you could please share your experience, that would be great. So this is what we have seen in the market, in my community of coaches. And most companies fall under these 4 categories. So we have a high collapse. There are surge around 17% growth, and then 30% a contraction. Okay, so the majority of people that we have on the call are actually on the bottom 2. Okay, cool, great, good to know. There's another webinar that I had that I do have people actually in the balloons part where they have revenue has actually increased by more than 50% in phase 1. What I'm saying is that don't be fooled by your demand experience in the lockdown phase. It is important to understand what would it look like in phase 2 and phase 3. It is also key to understand what is your underlying market dynamics. Are you actually in a growing market, a stable market, or actually in a declining market? So let me talk through 8 examples so that you can correlate to it. If you have companies that actually have experienced demand, balloon demand, they could fall under 2 categories. They could be really in a global market where it is accelerating, or they could be just experiencing a spike. And one example is the home delivery meal kit category, which is like a Marley Spoon or HelloFresh. I'm not sure if any of you have used them during the lockdown, but this is an example where demand has ballooned for them and actually pushed the trend to reach a tipping point. Because if you think about it, a home meal delivery kit fit under the 3 key trends. One is convenience consumption, because you don't even have to go buy the grocery. Second is actually on health and wellness, because it's actually fresh ingredient that you cook at home. And the 3 is the working from home trend. So that actually fit under that 3 key trend. So it is actually a growing market. Interestingly enough, there was a startup that's called Gusto that was funded for $41 million in April while we're in the middle of lockdown, because their demand has actually ballooned. However, as we move into the phase 2, the demand will actually drop because, I mean, I'm not sure about you, but I'm probably a bit sick and tired of cooking another home cooked meal. And I also do not want to wash any more of dishes. So I would get any chance that I can, I will be going out to a cafe to have a meal or enjoy a good meal out. So they will probably see a drop in demand in phase 2, but it will level off and actually continue to accelerate in its growth after the new normal, because it is in alignment with the 3 key trends. However, whether Marley Spoon will actually grow faster than HelloFresh, that is dependent on the individual company themselves of how they differentiate and how they compete. Next, as an example that I would have experienced a growth is a cleaning product or toilet paper. I'm sure everybody knows that, and everybody knows that there has been a hoarding of cleaning product as well as toilet paper. So it doesn't matter whether your toilet paper is 3-ply or scented, as long as this toilet paper is going out the shelf. But I don't think that it is actually a growing market, because as this whole thing died down in phase 3, I don't think there is more it's going to change people's cleaning habit, or there's actually more population increase that you need more toilet paper. So this is an example where it is in a stable market, or what I call a red ocean market. However, it does not mean that we will not have a growing company in the cleaning product space. If you're aware of this company called Cold Cleaning Products, check them out. They have been growing very fast. That is an example of a new category creation in a red ocean market. So even in a stable red ocean market, growth is still possible. Next, search and demand. Is it a growth market or is it just an adjustment? So online learning, it is actually in a growing market because the demand, yes, would have surged during lockdown because everybody is bored and they are moving to online to get educated. But the condition is creating the tailwinds with the trends that will actually kickstart the transformation, as we said, for the industry to go through a process of structuring, but the trend is tending towards online. So for that perspective, the search will actually become a growing market and the upward trend. It is important to understand the volatility and the up and down. It is just an up and down of an adjustment, or is it long-term trending upwards and downward? As for a virtual summit, that's a bit different because it is something like a stopgap solution for us because we are not able to meet physically. I would have loved to have meet all of you today, give a handshake, possibly, or give you a hug if I actually like you. But it is a stopgap arrangement for now because I think after this experience, most of us are actually craving more the human connection. So for networking and industrial connection, it is probably something that when everything resolves and when all this thing dies down in phase 3, people will look forward to go back to attend events again and actually meet new people. So this is actually more a stable market and it's an adjustment. Next, contraction. If I'm going to use an example of restaurants and the hospitality industry, just because it is obvious that they are heavily restricted in terms of their demand. And I call it restricted and not collapse because they can still continue to operate with takeaway and online ordering. So therefore, I call it a restricted market. It is important to note whether it is restricted or actually a market that has shifted into decline. So the example here is a niche themed restaurant. So think about maybe the organic vegan cafe in your neighborhood. They have a clear differentiated offering and they have a loyal following. So this is an example where they are in a stable, differentiated market itself. So they would have a reduced demand during lockdown, but as restriction eased and they are moving back into the new normal, the demand will probably resume back to where it was before. However, it's going to be different for a fine dining restaurant. Just because of the frugality trend that they are facing the headwinds. And it is actually a declining market when they come out of lockdown. Because again, the consumer spending is going to be less on discretionary. So when they come out, it's going to be a declining market. It's not like there's going to be no fine dining restaurant. It's just that out of the 5, maybe there's enough demand for 2. The last one is a collapse in market. So travel is a good example to illustrate the point whether it has hibernated or actually it has shrunk. Even within the travel sector, it is important to understand the category because it actually behaves differently. If you're in the adventure travel category, it has been a growing category and market before COVID. But because of the restriction now, the entire market is under hibernation. But where we resume the restriction and restriction eases, all of us is craving again for the authentic adventure experiences that we did not have. So in some ways, you can see during the long weekend, even now during school holiday and the queue with the reopening of Queensland border, everybody is dying to go camping and to go out and to travel. So actually, it is having all this pent-up demand that's resuming where it will continue to actually grow as travel restriction ease for the adventure travel market. But it will not go back to the same pre-COVID level until some time because there's going to be a lot of hangover effect. Again, luxury travel is a different category. And it will be in a declining market for the next few years, again, because of the frugality trend. So this is 8 examples that we have. So let's have the next poll now. Let's look at how has COVID changed or affect your underlying market. or what market do you think you are in? Are you in a growing market, a declining market, a stable market, or is it undergoing change? Okay, so we have, thanks. We have 7% declining, 28% stable, 41% undergoing change, and actually 31% a growing market. Great that you're in a growing market. Okay, what have we covered? So I've covered the 4 demand experience in phase 1. I've talked to you a little bit to help you understand the underlying market dynamics and give you 8 relatable consumer examples, because it's really, a consumer example is easy to relate to. We have also gone through the poll. You know what your market is like. So quickly, Peter Drucker says the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence itself, but to act with yesterday's logic. Regardless of market volatility, growth is possible, which is the theme for today's webinar. Either you are in a growing market, a stable market, or declining market, growth is possible because you have seen it. In a growing market, you have seen people growing faster than the market, outbeating the competition. You have also seen where people grow their market share within a stable market. You have also seen where there's a declining market that people grow by consolidating and actually adding new growth engines. So it is possible to grow regardless of whichever market you are in. However, you have to do something really different as what everybody else, your peer, is doing. And you have to proactively make those strategic moves. You first have to leverage whatever you have now. You need to ride the trends, because the trends are like the escalators. They move you faster. And the next thing is you have to make those strategic, bold moves in order to grow faster than whatever your peers and the market is moving in. So that is the 3 things that you need to do in order to grow regardless of the market volatility. Let's go a bit deeper. So there's a bit different for the top 2 companies, the growth and the surge, the balloon and the surge, the growth, and the bottom 2, which is the contraction and the collapse. So the opportunity for those that experience a spike and the surge in the demand is that there's an opportunity for you to thrive and emerge as a market leader in phase 3. And because it is the COVID experience, it's actually adding to your advantage. A rising tide lifts all boat. That's what it is. But you want to grow faster than your peers. So the risk here is that you're growing less than your peer, less profitable growth, no flywheel strategy, no reinvestment in differentiation while you're growing, and no capacity to execute your growth or no cash to grow. Whereas for the bottom 2, the risk here is that your inability to pivot successfully, you can't maintain the business and the team, you re-emerge weaker and then get consolidated, or you re-emerge to a completely different market that you're not even realizing that it has changed. And the opportunity here is for you to survive, to emerge stronger, and to thrive. And there are 3 key value drivers that is actually different from the top 2 and the bottom 2 of what you need to do. So for the bottom 2, at the end of the day, you somehow need to pivot your business in some way that you're going to thrive and grow. And you're going to play with your product and services. You're going to experiment with these key drivers, the pricing, your product services, as well as promotion, to at least get the customer engagement and get the growth going. You cannot stay and do the same thing. However, for the top 2, it's going to be different because the market is actually moving to your advantage. It's not about surviving. It's about how are you going to re-emerge as a market leader in a new position. And the variables that you're playing with is actually your product and services. How are you going to add and tweak your product and services that is going to create a flywheel effect? How are you going to achieve a more profitable growth, because growth is on your side? How are you going to have the processes that actually will help you meet the demand and scale and grow? So these 3 drivers are actually different for these 4 different categories of company. Let's use one example for the bottom 2. Fine dining restaurant chef Wolfgang is a HBR article, Google it. Obviously, fine dining, he was in a collapse scenario. The success criteria for him is how can I be profitable during lockdown? How can I aim for growth and actually pivot my business for growth? So that what you're aiming for is that you are aiming for a pivot. So what did he play with? The first attempt failed. He just continued as it is and did take away for 3 weeks, did not change his menu. It failed completely. He did not have the growth and the demand that he needed to survive. The second attempt was to experiment with the key value drivers in order to aim for growth. He played with his product and services, changed his existing menu, shift from fine dining to actually an experiential dining. He experimented with drinks and cocktail, promoted fried chicken Thursday. Again, he's a fine dining restaurant, but fried chicken Thursday is more like a pub. So he created new business categories like catering business, home shopping business that include air fryer, created a virtual cooking class, combined it with meal kit delivery and drinks. So he experimented with his product and services. He changed his pricing to reflect the new business, the new climate that he's in. Fine dining experience around $65 to $39. That's the right budget and pricing that's meeting the customer demand. He was not aiming for profit, but looking at customer growth. He actually experimented with discount in order to move inventory. He has a $150 virtual cooking class, which is quite premium, but it combined it with meal kit delivery and drinks. So what he was playing with was actually playing with product service pricing as well as promotion in order to find growth. And that's what you need to work on. You need to aim for the growth and then experiment with the ingredients that you have in order to hit for growth. And that's for the bottom two categories. Let's take a step back and go back to the 3 phases. We are now at the return and reimagine phase. And we want to re-emerge as in thriving. But to do that, we need to start to think now, what could be the big bets and strategic moves that we need to make in phase 2? And in order to do that, we actually need to have clarity now. But first, we need to have our resilience practices. The resilience practices is really important before you can make those moves. Then we need to have the clarity on what are the big bets and what are the big bets that we're going to bet on so that we can actually make those strategic moves. And as we emerge, we can then execute with agility so that we can adapt to the market movement and volatility in order to accelerate the growth. So now is the right time, and this is what we need to do. Let me unpack that a bit more. Let's start with resilience. Now, to start with all the chaos and changes happening, there must be a renewed vision. There must be a renewed vision for all of you that is more in line and appropriate for the new emerging world. So is there one? Do you know what that is? It might be a good time now to have that new renewed vision. And then make sure your resilience practices are in place and continuously check, because those are the foundation. And when there's cracks in the foundation, everything falls through, and crisis amplify weakness. And the resilience practices are really your purpose, which is why do you wake up in the morning and why do you exist in the business? And your people, the core bunch of A+ people of your team that you can depend on and that you trust. Then third is really your cash flow practices. So this is the foundation where you need to stand on for your growth. So make sure that is actually in place. And that's when you're ready for the next step, which is the clarity. You need to have clarity on what is the key big bets, trends that you are betting on so that you can either pivot or reposition yourself, depending you're the top 2 or the bottom 2, as you re-emerge. A pivot is necessary for you to re-emerge strong. You need to aim for the growth. You cannot aim to keep the lights on, because as business owner or CEO, there's so much effort that's required to change that it is not enough to maintain afloat. It is not worth the emotional, psychological, and mental energy for owner unless they are working towards growth. So it is no longer enough to just aim to survive and to play safe. Then you're ready to execute. You need to execute with agility. And the difference is, first, you need to break down with key strategic moves. What are the smaller rocks that actually you need to put in place, the smaller rocks that you need to put as stepping stones for you to make those strategic moves? You need to have clarity on that. And then you need to have the agility to ride the market forces and review and renew that constantly. There's a difference between what I call the trends and the market forces of volatility. Trends are long-term that you need to bet on for your strategic moves. However, the market volatility and market forces that you're experiencing right now are like the waves that you need to ride to get to the position that you're aiming for. And that is where you have your agility practices that you need to put in place to iterate and to refine, because in the next 2 years, there will still be a lot of unfoldment that's going to happen in the industries and what's going to happen in the market. You need to ride those forces and be agile. Then you're ready basically to move and aim for the renewed vision. It is important to realize that unless you take an offensive approach, you're not going to reach the point where you're thriving. It is not enough to play safe anymore. So let me take a quick step back and look, let's establish the facts here. The climate that you're going to experience the next 3 years is going to be a VUCA environment for at least the next 3 years. There'll be less money to spend for most people at all levels. And even they have the money, there'll be more cautious spending, which means the speed of how the money is circulating is actually going to be drastically reduced. It's going to be more restrictive and selective capital and lending, which means for the SMEs, which are the most vulnerable, around 40% minimum will be gone in phase 3. It's just a numbers thing. Less money, less economic activity, and the bottom, which is the SME, because they have less resources, more vulnerable, less capital, it's going to be more and more difficult for them to survive. So 40% will be gone. So the risk here is that risk is really in the inaction or the reaction to the volatility. The risk here is the BAU and the rigidity that you can't change. The risk here is that you're going to be busy but unproductive, or actually not strategic in terms of the direction you're moving in, or you might be outmoved by your competition. However, there's also an opportunity because of the chaos that's happening in the marketplace and also more distraction that your competitor might be distracted with. If you are strategic enough to make those bold moves to level up and accelerate your growth, you could emerge possibly as a leader and thriving. So the question to ask is really, are you going to be the 60% standing? Because if you aim high, you might at least be safe. But if you're playing safe, you might not be left standing, because again, probably around 40% of SMEs will be gone in phase 3. So what are you going to be doing differently to emerge stronger and to lead? Do you understand the market dynamics and what is it going to shift to make those calculated moves? And most importantly, how are you going to maintain focus and agility when the noise and the distraction are so high? So the moment is not to be lost. Those who step up their game will be much better off. And business as usual is no longer enough because the game has changed too much. Summary, aim high, leverage now, right trends, make strategic move, and stay agile, because BAU is no longer enough as the game has changed. Can we just have the next poll, please? So after today's insight, what I've just covered, I just want to ask, what action would you take after today's insight? I've done 3 webinars. I've nobody actually ever voted on nothing different. Today I have 1 voter who says that they're gonna do nothing different. That's great. Okay, great. 62% is gonna work out your strategic move. Excellent. All right, stop the result. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, let's assume, I'm glad that all of you are really excited and are going to take your bold strategic moves. Let's take another poll now, because I know that a lot of people get excited and inspired with the webinar, and then a week later, nothing has happened. So I want to ask you, what have been the biggest obstacles that has been preventing you and your team from taking those actions and executing on your vision? Can we have the poll, please? Okay, we have 32% lack of clarity, 46%, is this changing? Not built to be agile, not able to focus with too many distractions. Yeah. Motivation is low. Okay, system, you don't have a system. Yeah. So I always say, you always need to be aware of the obstacles and actually address the obstacles. We are really constantly on what I call a cognitive hijack now. The noise level is so high that it's really difficult and more difficult actually to get people's attention or to have the focus. So you need to have a system and a way to tune out the noise. And a lot of people are feeling, again, that cognitive overload because of the change and chaos that's happening in all around us. It is important to be hyper-focused. And the way to do it actually is to elevate and focus the energy on building the new. You have to elevate the new vision. You have to elevate the way that you want to go and what it looks like, and actually create a dashboard and the visibility that's right front and center in front of you. The only way to cut out distraction is to elevate the focus in terms of your new vision of where you want to go. It's really important. Motivation, quickly introduce the motivation equation, because it's important to start with understanding the obstacles that we have in mind. How do you increase motivation is that you need to activate what I call whatever that you value and desire. Why are you excited? Why is it important? You need to activate those desires. You need to increase the confidence that you're able to do it so that you can increase the motivation, you and your team as well. And you need to protect yourself and the team from what I call distraction. I don't know about you, my distraction is YouTube. I can watch it for 3 hours nonstop, right? So how do you create and reduce distraction where you create this, what I call the all in and the commitment, and have accountability actually in place? And how do you reduce delay? Because if you wait to start next week instead of tomorrow to do your planning and to start to put a plan together, the longer you delay, the longer it's going to actually create a demotivation in yourself. So you need to create and take quick action as soon as possible whenever you feel inspired. So think about how are you going to protect your motivation. Next, I want to talk about emotional agility, because I think this is one of the things that's actually hijacking people in terms of taking action. I don't know about you, but I can sit here and talk to you about growth is possible in all market volatility, but I can still wake up and I'll feel like shit. I will feel sad someday and I'll feel angry. And it's not like my situation is not good. I mean, in fact, life is pretty good, but the emotions and the feeling is still overwhelming me, and it's still coming in waves, right? I mean, if you are a human being, you will experience these emotions because we are in unprecedented times. So these emotions as negative, it's going to hijack you. It's going to take you away from the goals and the action taking. It is important that you address them and actually flush through and process them in order for you to take positive action. And there's a process to do so. So Google Susan David's emotional agility if you want to find out more. But quickly, the first step is acceptance. The denier is the one that keeps us stuck. So you first have to accept the reality of what's going on in your market. First, you need to accept it. Only then, the next thing is to look at your emotions and actually have a compassion for them. Do not blame, do not shame, do not criticize. If some days you don't feel motivated, do not criticize yourself or your team members. Create habits. It is more important now to create habits and routine that you check in constantly with how you're feeling, because again, of the rate of change around you. And clear those emotions and acknowledge them and reconnect to your vision and your values and your direction. That's the only way you're going to get energy and motivation from. Only then you will be ready to take bold actions. If you're stuck at this point, it's very difficult to move up. So you have to go through this process again to process your emotion in order to take those actions. So that's how you can actually move from negative emotions to action. Next thing, create a system of alignment and accountability. So there's a saying that goes, if you have figured out how to go to the moon, don't start the journey unless you have figured out how to come back. Okay, to the moon and back. This is really important. It's like, okay, you feel inspired now and you want to take those strategic action, but you know all these obstacles in front of you that is going to make it different. So don't start the journey unless you set up a system for accountability and alignment. You know, ask yourself these questions. Unless you answer this question, don't start the journey, because you're going to hit obstacles every step of the way. Create the system so that when you're in the system, everything gets easier. You don't have to reinvent the wheel constantly again and again. So ask yourself these 5 questions. I'm not going to go through that because we don't have time. And make sure that you have an answer to them before you start that journey. So with that, I'm going to go into Q&A. So Chris,
Thank you very much, Josephine, for that. That was a very well-rounded presentation with certainly a lot of really interesting insights out of the polls. I particularly found the takeaway that BAUs are no longer possible, and also just the importance of making those big, bold strategic bets sort of really resonated. And also the poll insight, I think that despite 70% of businesses on the call being in either the collapse or the downward trend, most companies actually seeing themselves in the growth market. So I think that's a really positive takeaway.
Yes, I agree, Chris. I was surprised. Okay, quickly.
Yeah, we've had a lot of questions, I know, come through.
Okay,
previously. I'd love you to maybe just rapid fire and try and answer as many as you can. We'll share a copy of the slides afterwards as well. So look out for those. And then, we've also had a question, Josephine, just around resources people could look at. So, you know, any book recommendations or things that people should read as well. Love to hear that as well. Okay,
books. Okay. Can I just quickly answer some questions from that was submitted previously from some attendees that I want to talk through? Is that okay? Because some was submitted earlier.
That's great.
Yeah, so these are some of the questions that were submitted earlier. And one of them, I was talking about marketing in these challenging times and actually sales and digital. So I just want to talk through this because I think that the people need to understand how is it different now compared to before. So people are asking, okay, how do I do marketing and how do I do sales? I think that it is more important now to realize that when you're doing marketing now, it is important to communicate, to engage. Meaningful messages are getting more and more important. What I see is I see a lot of marketers actually in terms of advertisement, they are talking to me as if nothing has changed. That's what I mean. It's almost that there's an elephant in the room and they are not acknowledging it. So it's like what you're communicating now, you need to have the COVID filter. How has need changed? What is the new problem to be solved for your consumer? I think that has to be really clear in the marketing messages. And also it is more important now, the human connection and the meaning in the messaging itself. Because again, times are really different. And with regards to sales, I said, instead of trying to sell and push, how can you serve? How can you be of value? How can you connect to your customer? And how are you showing empathy? And how are you collaborating with them and co-creating? Because actually, when you are experimenting with your product and services now in this transitional stage, you need to co-create and probably experiment a little bit with the customer right now, with what could be the new demands and new needs that you probably are not aware of. And pricing and risk. So because more and more people are reluctant to spend, because from their perspective, the risk has increased, you need to think about when you're selling, how can you reduce the risk itself for your customer with regard to your pricing? So these are some of the value drivers and things that you cannot be BAU that you're going to play with in your sales and your marketing. So pricing is one of the interesting things where you probably have to repackage and rebundling to reduce the risk to buy. And these are the additional things that you need to play with. However,
Thanks, Josephine. That also helps answer a question we had come through in the Q&A around really the models or ways that you test putting out new value propositions.
Yeah.
And for those that are interested, we will be continuing to run sessions specific to marketing as well. So stay tuned for future updates on those events as well.
And just one key point, again, I just want to highlight, because this is an unprecedented competition. Okay, who is competing for the same dollar? This has really shifted. Before that, people, for example, I have $10 to spend. Now I have $5. So now you're not really competing with the same category of competition as well. It's like in the B2C space, right? Instead of hot yoga versus online yoga, I'm not even choosing to compete these two. I'm choosing between yoga and martial arts, which might be a different category. So in the B2B space, it's like, well, instead of thinking I'm choosing between HubSpot and MailChimp, I'm actually reprioritizing my priority and budget, and I might choose to upgrade my supply chain instead of spending on a marketing software. So your competition now has probably shifted in terms of the same dollar quite differently. And that is what you need to be aware of, because the competition and demand has really shifted. And unless you have clarity on these two top level at the strategic level, you can't answer marketing and sales. Do you know what I mean? Because the marketing and sales fall under the execution of those demand and competition. So I say review the competition and dollar spend, and review and check the demand again. Has the demand completely shifted and the needs completely changed? Is your product still relevant, important, and prioritized? Because most of the time, it's probably not prioritized right now, and people will not spend. I hope that helps.
Fantastic. Thank you, Josephine. We might have time to answer one more question before we wrap.
Okay, one poll to run though. Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe give us your killer resource. You know, we had a lot of people in the polls saying, you know, it's fantastic to recognize the problem, but now we've actually got to do something, and we can't, there's no point if we look back on the next week and go, okay, all of that great framework is lost. You know, what is your one suggestion for helping people sort of push through and take action?
Only one
outside of contact you on LinkedIn.
Right. Again, dependent on the bottom two and the top two. I think on the bottom two of the categories of the pivoting part, I think the whole experimentation, how are you going to experiment to aim for growth, is going to be important. I don't know about books, to be honest, in terms of the experimentation. I think Alex Otenwald on testing business idea and hypothesis might be important to look at. And obviously all the startups here would be really good at that. On the top two, in terms of scaling and accelerating for growth, if you are in a growing market and an emerging market, I would really highly recommend, obviously, the book called Play Bigger. And obviously, I'm a bit biased because they're actually about creating a new category. And it's going to be getting more, it will be getting noisier and noisier out in the market. And how are you going to differentiate yourself? So if you're going to differentiate yourself when it's a creation of a new market, I highly recommend the book called Play Bigger. It's really about how to actually create a new market and creating a category and designing a category. As for differentiation strategy, there is a book called Tree Hack that might be pretty interesting for some people as well in terms of dominating a market. That could be Tree Hack, Tree, H-A-G, the Tree Hack Way. So that could be a good book and resource.
Fantastic. Well, we might wrap it there in the interest of time, but thank you so much, Josephine. That was a really insightful and quite practical presentation as well. For everyone that joined us, thank you. We'll be sharing a copy of this presentation as well as Josephine's details. And you can see that you can reach her on LinkedIn or via her YouTube channel that she loves to spend all those hours on as well. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day and see you for one of our future Stone and Chalk events.